A Great Argead Saga ALEXEIN, Alexander the Great. Volume 1, Telesias, The War Dance. By Macaulay Naki. Episode 56-2, Shadows of the Piraeus. In the mist-shrouded highlands of Epirus, the oracle of Dodona hummed with a primal, suffocating energy. Predating the younger cults of the south, this was the oldest sanctuary in all of Hellas, where the voice of Zeus did not manifest through the trances of a priestess, but through the Seloi, sacred priests who slept upon the bare earth and eschewed the washing of their feet, to remain in unyielding, grounding contact with the soil. They interpreted the will of the king of gods through the rhythmic, haunting rustling of the leaves of the Phagus, a colossal and ancient sacred oak. It was a raw, unfiltered form of divination, practiced long before the marble halls of Delphi were ever envisioned as the center of the world. Legend held that the sanctuary was founded when two black doves took flight from Thebes in Egypt. One landed at Dodona and spoke in a human tongue, declaring the site a vessel for divine truth. In practice, this lore evolved into the Pili, three elder priestesses who observed the flight patterns, behavior, and cries of the doves that nested within the sacred canopy. The site was further defined by the Dodonian gong and unnerving arrangement of bronze cauldrons suspended near the oak. When the mountain wind surged, these vessels would strike against one another, producing a dissonant metallic chime. The priests and priestesses listened to this chaotic ringing, interpreting the duration and sequence of the strikes to discern the tremors of fate. At the foot of this towering, silver-barked oak, the younger king Erebus of Epirus stood, his cloak heavy with the damp of the mountain air. He had come to seek counsel, his face etched with the weariness of a man struggling to hold a fractured kingdom together. The lead priest of the Seloi stood before him, listening with his head bowed to the wind as it moved through the canopy. "I need to know what the sacred oak foretells," Erebus said, his voice low, vibrating with the urgency of his burdens. "My concerns are threefold." The priest remained motionless, listening intently to the creak of branches and the whisper of leaves. "First," Erebus continued, his grip tightening on his staff, "the situation with my older brother, King Neoptolemus. The crown of Epirus sits heavy between us, and our house remains divided when it should be a fortress. Second, and this weighs most heavily upon my soul, is the imminent threat of the Illyrians. Their raids are no longer mere skirmishes. They are a tide of iron rising in the west, and my borders are thin." The king paused, looking up into the dark, swirling clouds caught in the oak's branches. "The third is inextricably linked to those Illyrian movements. It is our neighbor, Macedonia. Their throne is fractured, bled dry by internal strife and the assassination of their line. The last son of Amyntas, the young Prince Philip, has been taken as a hostage, sent to Thebes along with 70 other noble boys." Erebus stepped closer to the trunk of the great tree, his eyes searching the dark leaves. "Does the rustling speak of this boy? If Macedonia falls to the Illyrian wolves, or if it remains in Theban chains, does it mean the end of Epirus? Tell me, priest, what does the wind reveal?" The priest gestured toward a flat, moss-covered stone at the base of the Phagus. "Sit, King Erebus," he commanded, his voice as dry and rustling as the oak's foliage. "Clear your mind of the ambition that clouds your blood. Do not think of the crown, nor the blade, nor the boy. If your thoughts wander, the rustle of the leaves will become merely the wind, and the message will be lost to the air. Be still. Be as the roots." Erebus obeyed, settling onto the damp stone. He closed his eyes, forcing his pulse to slow, stripping away the noise of his kingdom until there was only the cold mountain silence. The priest began his chant, a low, guttural vibration that seemed to emanate not from his throat, but from the earth beneath their feet. It was a language of the earliest dawn, stripped of all lyrical artifice, a repetitive grinding sound that resonated with the ancient wood. As the priest swayed, his unwashed feet gripping the soil, he addressed the great tree not as an object, but as a living deity. "Father of the storm, speaker of the truth," the priest intoned, his hands raised toward the dark interlocking branches. "The son of the mountain asks for clarity. Shed your skin for the truth." The air around them grew heavy, charged with a sudden localized static. Then the Dodonian gongs responded. A jagged gust surged through the grove, catching the suspended bronze cauldrons. Clang. Gong. Clang. The dissonant metallic roar echoed through the clearing, the vibrations traveling up through the king's very marrow. It was an unnerving rhythmic assault that turned the sanctuary into a resonating chamber of iron and air. The priest waited, his head tilted upward, eyes fixed on the canopy as the gongs faded into a lingering, mournful hum. High above, a sudden gust, unprompted by the valley winds, shuddered through the silver-barked limbs. Clatter. A handful of dark, leathery leaves spiraled down, twisting through the dim light like falling birds. They struck the forest floor with surprising weight. The priest did not move immediately. He waited for the final vibrating echoes of the bronze to die away into absolute silence, his own breathing shallow and rhythmic. Erebus gripped his knees, his knuckles white, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Is this the judgment? He wondered, his gaze darting between the priest's weathered face and the dark patterns on the ground. Is my reign already a ruin in the eyes of the gods? The silence of the grove felt judgmental, the very air pressing against his skin like a physical weight. The priest knelt, his callous fingers tracing the position of the fallen foliage on the damp earth, with the precision of a scholar reading a map of war. His brow furrowed, a slow, grim understanding spreading across his features as he touched a jagged, curled leaf. He looked back at the king, his expression unreadable, carved by years of harsh weather and harder truths. The wind and the bronze have spoken, king of Epirus, the priest said, his voice raspy and devoid of comfort. The leaves have fallen in a pattern of broken circles. Erebus leaned forward, his voice a tight, strained whisper. Broken circles? Does it speak of my house or of the unity of Epirus? Tell me, man, do I hold my throne, or am I merely watching its slow decay? The priest did not look up, his eyes locked on a specific thorn-edged leaf resting at the center of the ark. The oracle does not offer you ease, king. It offers only the shape of the coming storm. He hides the worst of it, Erebus thought, a cold sweat breaking across his brow. He knows what the tree has seen, and he fears that, if he speaks the whole truth, the earth beneath us will simply swallow me whole. Speak it, Erebus commanded, his voice hardening with the desperate resolve of a man staring into an abyss. I did not come to the Phagus for riddles. If the circles are broken, tell me who broke them. The priest finally raised his gaze, the dim light glinting in his hollow eyes. He pointed a withered finger to the configuration. Your brother's ambition is a fever that will burn itself out, but it will leave your house scorched. The Illyrians are the storm, but they are not the end. They are merely the heralds of the chaos to come. He leaned closer to the king, his voice dropping to a harsh final whisper that seemed to carry the ghost of the bronze resonance. But the boy, Philip. The leaves gathered around his name are choked with thorns. The tree says he's not a hostage in the way you fear. He's a blade being sharpened on a Theban whetstone. If he lives, he will not just stop the Illyrians, he will remake the world in his image. The sacred oak does not care for your borders, Erebus. It only sees that the man who emerges from the cage of Thebes will be the one who decides if Epirus stands or falls. Erebus stared at the leaves, the weight of the prophecy settling into his marrow. A blade, he thought, his own hand drifting instinctively to the hilt of his sword. I came seeking a shield for my kingdom, and the god offers me only a weapon that may one day turn against me. The heavy bronze doors of the inner chamber echoed against the stone as King Neoptolemus I strode in, his cloak smelling faintly of wood smoke and mountain rain. General Lycomedes followed closely behind him, his heavy greaves clanking with a grim, measured cadence. Waiting by the hearth were Queen Andromache and their daughters Troas and Polyxena, the firelight catching the anxious tension etched across the queen's face. Neoptolemus unclasped his sword belt, letting the bronze weapon hit the oak table with a dull thud. He looked at his family, his jaw tight. How do I explain to them what the crown actually demands? Neoptolemus thought, staring at the flicker of the flames. They see only the purple mantle and the gold, but they do not feel the crushing weight of the oath we swore at Passarum. A golden yoke, Andromache thought, watching the dark exhaustion hollow out her husband's eyes. We wear the symbols of power while our foundation crumbles from beneath our feet. The assembly at the tribal communes grows restless, Neoptolemus said aloud, his voice dropping into a gravelly register. He turned to Andromache, who stood tall, her eyes assessing the quiet panic in his posture. They murmur about the split crown, Andromache said evenly, stepping closer. They whisper that dividing Epirus between you and your brother Erebus has made our shield wall brittle. Is it true, my lord? Are the prostates threatening to invoke the oath? They do not need to invoke it yet, General Lycomedes interjected, stepping forward into the firelight, his weathered face shadowed by grim resolve. He placed a heavy, scarred hand on the table. If the prostates move against the crown before we can mend this, there will be no kingdom left to save, Lycomedes thought bitterly. But the danger is real, Queen Andromache. We are bound by the ancient laws of our fathers. The crown of the Molossians is not an absolute throne carved out of divine right. It is a precarious contract. A dual chain forged at Passarum. Troas, the elder daughter, stepped closer to her mother, her gaze flashing with mature defiance. What is a contract, father? Troas asked, her voice steady and sharp in the heavy silence. Does the king not simply command? Neoptolemus offered a bitter, humorless smile, kneeling down to look his eldest daughter in the eye. No, my child. In Epirus, a king does not just command. Every year, at the sacred meadows of Passarum, I swear before the assembly of warriors to rule by our ancestral laws and respect the rights of every free tribesman. And in return, they swear to defend me, only so long as I keep that oath. If my brother Erebus and I allow our bitter rivalry to fracture this kingdom, the contract snaps. And when the contract snaps, the throne falls into ruin. Polixena watched them, her brow furrowed with a sharp, precocious intelligence. They tear the crown apart with their bare hands and weep when the blood spills on their own feet, Polixena thought, her gaze narrowing as she listened to her father's confession. They stand in the hall of our ancestors reciting the oaths like sacred shields, yet they use the law as a dagger against each other. And Uncle Erebus? Polixena whispered aloud, looking between her father and the shadows of the doorway. Does he see that the kingdom is splitting? Does he care? He sees only his own pride. Just as I have been blinded by mine, Neoptolemus muttered, standing back up and looking toward the dark northern horizon. We are playing a dangerous game with the blood of our house, Neoptolemus thought, a cold sweat breaking out across his neck. While we bicker over fractions of the throne, the Illyrian warbands gather in the passes like wolves smelling a wounded stag. We cannot afford a house divided, General Lycomedes urged, casting a sharp look toward the queen. If we do not reconcile with Erebus, and if we do not honor the balance of the prostates and the assembly, the traditional check and balance will crush us before our enemies ever cross the border. Andromache stepped forward, her hand gently resting on Neoptolemus's arm, offering a steady anchor amidst the political storm. Then send the riders tonight, my king. Remind your brother of the oath we all share. For Epirus cannot survive a house at war with itself. The heavy oak doors swung open, and King Erebus strode into the chamber, his boots echoing sharply against the stone floor. He had been summoned by urgent dispatch from his older brother, and the dust of a hard, frantic ride still clung to his traveling cloak. Neoptolemus stood by the hearth, watching him enter with a grim, exhausted expression. General Lycomedes stepped forward out of the shadows, his weathered face etched with deep lines of dread. The Illyrians are back, Lycomedes announced without preamble, his voice tight. They attacked the outer western settlements at dawn. Erebus froze, his hand dropping from his sword hilt. Already, he thought, a cold knot tightening in his stomach as the reality of their fractured kingdom slammed into him. How was the damage? Did the mountain guards hold the ridge? The ridge held, but the valleys bled, Lycomedes replied heavily. Neoptolemus stepped away from the fire, his eyes locking onto his younger brother. The bitter rivalry that had poisoned their court for years suddenly felt trivial, burned away by the raw panic of impending ruin. We can no longer afford to be a divided dual-state young brother, Neoptolemus said, his voice dropping low, stripped of all pride. He speaks of unity now, Erebus thought bitterly, his jaw clenching as memories of stolen power and court insults flared behind his eyes. When the wolves are already tearing at our gates. The oath we swore at Passarum binds us to protect our people, Erebus countered aloud, stepping closer to the hearth, his voice sharp with defensive pride. Not to hand over my half of the crown because your generals failed to secure the frontier. Enough, Queen Andromache intervened, her voice slicing through the rising tension like a blade. She stepped between the brothers, her eyes flashing with a cold, royal fury. You bicker like boys over a broken toy, while Bardalus and his warbands burn our fields. Look at your daughters. Look at what your pride is costing us. They tear the crown apart with their bare hands and weep when the blood spills on their own feet, Polixena thought, her gaze narrowing as she listened to the petty venom in her father's and uncle's voices. They stand in the hall of our ancestors reciting the oaths of Passarum, like sacred shields, yet they use the law as a dagger against each other. If they cannot rule as one man, the Illyrians will not need to conquer Epirus. These two fools will hand it to them wrapped in purple cloth. A dual monarchy, splitting the kingdom in two? Polixena whispered aloud, her voice cutting through the men's quarrel. It isn't functioning, is it? It only makes us weaker. Beside her, Troas, the elder daughter, stepped closer to their mother, her gaze flashing with mature defiance. Why dual father? Troas asked, her voice steady and sharp in the heavy silence. When grandfather Alcides died, why did we not pass the crown to a single man? Why must there be two thrones if it only invites our enemies to break us? Because our ancestors feared tyranny, more than they feared chaos, Erebus thought bitterly, meeting his brother's gaze across the room. Neoptolemus flinched, the weight of their father's death pressing down on him. He looked down at his eldest daughter, holding her intense gaze before answering. You ask why there are two crowns, Troas? When our father, King Alcides, died having expanded our borders with Syracuse and Spartan iron, the kingdom did not pass to a single absolute ruler. Instead, adhering to ancient customs of shared tribal authority and familial arbitration, the realm of Epirus was split in two, with your uncle and me reigning side by side as co-kings. Yet this arrangement has warped the very principles it was meant to uphold, Erebus added, his tone turning reflective as he stepped closer to the hearth, meeting his brother's eyes across the fire. While a traditional dual monarchy usually balanced power between a king and the tribal prostates, your father and I literally split the royal house of the Aeacidi. By partitioning the realm between two rival brothers, Neoptolemus admitted grimly, his voice carrying the heavy burden of their shared mistake. Traditional checks and balances were weaponized by family pride. Instead of serving as a constitutional safeguard for the Molossan tribes, our dual leadership threatened to fracture the tribal koinon into hostile factions, leaving the southern passes dangerously exposed to the oncoming avalanche of Illyrian warbands led by Bardalus. General Lycomedes nodded slowly, crossing his heavy arms over his armored chest. The Epirus system of limited kingship always relied on a unified military defense coordinated through the assembly. When you both allowed personal grievances and isolated court politics to keep you divided, the entire framework began to collapse from within. As we well recognize, a divided shield wall is easily shattered. The ancient contract demanded that co-kings put aside their domestic friction to protect the valleys, Andromache said, stepping up beside her husband and placing a firm, grounding hand on his arm. Neoptolemus looked across the hearth at his brother, his expression clearing of all stubborn defiance. The survival of the crown depends on returning to the collaborative roots of our constitutional covenant, uniting our forces before the northern wolves and southern tyrants can exploit the fracture once and for all. Erebus stared at his brother's outstretched hand for a long, agonizing heartbeat, feeling the crushing ghosts of their father's legacy behind them. Then, with a slow, solemn breath, he stepped forward and gripped Neoptolemus's forearm in the warrior's clasp. For the survival of Epirus, Erebus whispered, the ancient rivalry finally laid to rest in the ashes of the hearth. To be continued in episode 57, Threshold of the South. A Great Argead Saga ALEXEIN. Volume 1, Telesias, the War Dance. A new episode every single day. We are dropping a new episode every day until the epic conclusion of Volume 1. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 15 to 30-minute hit of cinematic historical drama, perfect for your daily plunge into antiquity. Watch and listen now. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full saga now. Bookmark Volume 1, Telesias Playlist. Bookmark Volume 1, Divine Oracle Playlist. Join the Vanguard. Subscribe to follow the bloody rise of the Argead dynasty. Thumbs up to help push our vanguard through the algorithm's gauntlet. Comment below.